Hey everyone, welcome to That's Cakeable. I'm Janine, and this week I'm going to show you how I created this personalised, moving alarm clock cake. This baby can be personalised for any occasion. It's baby time, it's wedding time, anything. During the course of this video, I'll pop a link up to show you how to create your own round, two-size, personalised edible image at home. Well, time waits for no man, so let's get on with the video. So the structure for the cake is a little bit involved, and I've done a step-by-step video to show you how it's done. I'm going to link that video in the description below. You can pop over to my website at that'scakeable.com to see how it was done. Okay, let's start putting this clock cake together. So the first thing you want to do, of course, as you need to do with all cake structures, is make sure that everything is food safe. Now I'm taking my cake structure and I'm attaching it to a setup board with a little bit of ganache. Now for this cake, I've baked 2 chocolate cakes that are 2 inches high each and 7 inches round. Now I've cut these cakes into 4 layers. We'll probably only use 3 because it is a 3-inch high styrofoam dummy. But with 1 layer, you want to cut that down and see that it fits on that backboard. Remember to cut a little bit less than a little bit more because you can keep taking it off until it fits well. Once you get it right, go ahead and do that with the other 3 layers. Now it's time to start stacking up the cakes. I'm popping ganache all over the back of that board and on the shelf area. So one by one, stack the cakes on top of each other with a little bit of ganache between each layer. I used a little bit of extra cake just to backfill some of those gaps. You can, of course, use ganache. I then went ahead with some more ganache, crumb coated the cake, and then popped it in the freezer for about 10 minutes to chill. Now let's get the good ganache coat on. So the first part of the cake I'm going to ganache are the sides, and there is a method to my madness for ignoring the top. Go ahead and ganache the sides just like you would a normal round cake, but of course you've got those awkward little legs down the bottom, so just do the best you can with what you have. Once it's all nice and ganached and smooth, I've taken a knife and just made marks where the top of that shelf board is. This will ensure that I know where that board is later on. Then go ahead and ganache the top of the cake, making sure that it's nice and level, ganaching over the top of that styrofoam and making sure that the styrofoam level and the cake level are seamless. Once again, chuck the cake into the freezer to chill up because it'll make the next step a heck of a lot easier. So once the cake's nice and chilled down, bring it back out, and what I've done is taken a 7-inch round of baking paper and I've coated that with some vegetable shortening. I attached that to the top of my now ganached cake. So now what I need to do with the baking paper now nicely on top is to remove the cake from its setup board very carefully. Clean your setup board really well. And then you want to put the cake back on the board but upside down. Once you've got the cake flipped upside down, clean the back of that base board of the cake so that there's no ganache there. And then what I did is I rolled out my fondant. I'm using pink for my clock, and I covered the back of the board. Smoothed it all out, and then I flipped it back upside down again. A little bit of flipping involved in this one. I took a sharp paring knife and making sure that I was straight up and down, I cut the excess fondant off the board. Okay, one more flip to do. I want to flip the cake back over so that the fondant on that backboard is exposed to the air and can dry out overnight. Okay, so I'm going to make the clock face ahead of time. I rolled out some white fondant. Now you want this to be reasonably thin, but not so thin that you can't maneuver it around without it breaking. I then smoothed that fondant out and then placed it on a really well dusted board. Now you can use either icing sugar or you can use corn flour, whatever you wish. Using my very well loved cake tin, that's a 7-inch round also, I used that as a guide to cut out a 7-inch round out of that fondant. I removed the excess and then set that aside to dry. Okay, I'm a little bit more rested now, and so is the cake, so it's time to start covering the sides. I went ahead and measured the circumference and the height of the cake just to make sure that I rolled out enough fondant to cover both upwards and around. Once I had my fondant rolled out and I made sure that it was long enough and tall enough to go around the cake, I added some piping gel to the sides of the cake to attach the fondant to. Before I go ahead and wrap the cake, I've got to make sure that the marks I made on the side of the cake showing us where that cake board is transferred to the outside somewhere so that we know where we're going. So I've just made a couple of little marks in the backboard with a sharp knife showing where that board is. Now this bit's a little bit tricky because you've got those legs standing out the base of the cake, but it is doable, and don't forget that if you do make some tears and marks, you won't see them because it's underneath. So I took the piece of fondant that I'd rolled to size and I just wrapped that around the cake and smoothed it out as I went. Now it's time to flip the cake back over, so over she goes. Okay, time to add the clock mechanism to the cake. And this is why I made the mark to show us where that board was, so I know where to cut into the cake. We don't want to hit board or we're not going to be able to fit that mechanism in. The first step, of course, is to make this mechanism food safe. After placing the battery, what I did was covered the entire mechanism in aluminium foil tape, and then just for a bit of added peace of mind, I covered it in some plastic wrap. Now I'd made a small template of the mechanism and I coated that in some vegetable shortening so it didn't stick to the ganache and placed it on top of the cake, making sure that you're clearing that area where the board is. I then took a small paring knife and started cutting out around that template. Now going little by little, I just started scooping some cake out of that area that I had just cut. I kept taking the mechanism and checking the height in the cake. We want the actual black section to be flush with the cake. Now the reason I went little by little is it's easier to take cake out than it is to add it in. However, don't panic if you do go a little too deep. You could always backfill that area with some ganache or some cake clay or just some extra cake. Once the mechanism was in and nice and flush with the top of the cake, I just took a little bit of the extra ganache from around the sides of where I'd cut and just sort of spread it over the top just to make sure that it was nice and secure. The next thing we want to do is to take the white 7-inch round panel of fondant that we'd made the night before to firm up and place that gently on top where you want it to be. As you place it on top, the mechanism will mark whereabouts you need to cut a hole. And make sure to clear that whole center section so that the arms have room to move. I just used a piping tip that was large enough to fit the mechanism in. A little bit of water on the back of that panel, and then I popped that on top. Now we need to add our personalized edible image to this cake. You can watch my video here of how I created my personalized edible image and how you can create it in any size you want. So what I'm doing is taking my edible image and of course cutting around the guideline that I've made that circle so that it fits on top of the cake. Once your edible image is cut out, do the same thing as we did with the white panel of fondant. Lay it on top of the cake around about where you want it to be and make just a slight mark where that mechanism comes through. Once that's done, either cut out with an X-Acto blade or a coinciding piping tip the hole in the center. Put a little bit of water onto the white panel on top of the cake and add your edible image carefully. Okay, we've got the edible image placed where we want it placed. Now it's time to get those clock hands on. So the hands that came with the mechanism weren't exactly aesthetically to my liking, nor were they practical for this particular project. They were the wrong color and they were the wrong size, but easy fixed. The first thing I did was took the hour hand and the minute hand and I cut them all the way down to that little hole that goes over the center mechanism. Now we need something to support the hands that we're going to put on. So what I did was I hot glued just a small piece of floral wire to both of the hands. I placed the first hand, which is the hour hand, over the mechanism in the center of the cake. And then I coated all of that with a little bit of piping gel, being careful not to get right in the center of that hole where the mechanism actually turns. I cut out a strip of the same pink fondant that I covered the cake in, making it the size that I thought was, well, aesthetically pleasing. I also cut out a heart with a small heart-shaped cutter, and then I popped a hole in the center of that heart using a piping tip. Firstly, I placed the strip on the piece of wire that I'd coated in piping gel, and then very carefully placed the heart over the top and just cut out a little section of the actual strip part to make sure that the heart fit in quite snugly. I then went ahead and did exactly the same thing for the minutes arm. The second arm, I'd actually already put a very thin strip of fondant over the actual arm section, so I popped that on, and then with a tiny little heart-shaped cutter, I cut out a piece of fondant and popped the little heart right at the top of that hand. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is put a frame around the clock face. I'm keeping this super simple by just rolling out a piece of the same coloured pink fondant into a really, really long snake shape. I run just a little bit of water all the way around the edge of the clock face. Then I take that long strip of fondant and I run it all the way around the perimeter of the clock face. So the clock's got hands, well now she needs numbers. Taking the same pink fondant, I made sure I rolled it out super duper thin. Now a lot of people are put off by tappets, but they don't have to be that difficult. I find two tricks work really well for me. Number one, the fondant has to be really thin. Number two, I spray mine with just a little bit of cooking spray. I cut out the 12, the 3, the 6 and the 9, and then I went ahead and I attached them to the clock face with just a little bit of water. It's possibly going to help if I go back and do a few lessons on analog clocks, because I put the 6 where the 9 was meant to be and the 9 where the 6 was meant to be. Luckily, I caught it before it was too late and fixed that right up. And just to finish off the clock face, it's totally up to you. You can add more numbers if you would like to, but I just chose to add little dashes between the numbers. I did that by rolling out some of the same coloured pink fondant and then cut 8 equal lengths to fit around the clock face. That's the clock face done, so now it's time to put the clock in the stand. So to mount the cake on the cake stand, you need to carefully pick it up. Now at this size, it's actually a lot lighter than you'd expect. I put one leg into the first hole and then very slowly pop the other leg into the other hole. It ended up being quite simple. Now to give it a bit of extra security, I just went around with a bit of hot glue and hot glued around the base of those legs. Now I'm going to spruce up those legs a little bit. So initially I made them sort of a cylindrical shape. Didn't like it so much, went ahead and used a ball shape instead. Now I know I didn't get all the footage for this. Silly me, put the camera next to me, but forgot to press record. So all I did was rolled some white fondant into a ball. I cut it pretty much through the center, leaving just the front intact, and wrapped that around the base of the leg. Once I was happy with the shape, I did that on the other side, and then I went ahead and I painted that with a little bit of gold highlighter paint mixed with alcohol. Okay, now we have to finish up the bells and whistles, literally. To make the two bells on the top, what I did was I took a half sphere mold and I've just melted some white chocolate and poured that into the mold, sort of swirling it around a little bit so I end up with more of a shell rather than a solid mass. Once it was all chilled up, I brought it back and popped it out of the mold and it was ready to decorate. So I wanted to keep these bells the same color as the actual clock. What I did was rolled out some of that same pink fondant pretty thinly, gave it a spritz with some water, and then just wrapped it over the top of the chocolate half sphere that I just made. I smoothed that all down and then I cut off the excess. Then I just flipped it upside down and made sure that all of the edges were reasonably clean. Once that was done, I popped the half sphere back into its original mold just to hold it there for a moment. I put a dot of white chocolate right in the center of the half sphere. And then I took a skewer and just held it in the center, spritzed it with a little bit of freeze spray. Now, if you don't have freeze spray, that's okay. Just hold it until it sets up enough to stand there on its own, and then leave it for about 20 minutes or pop it in the freezer for about 5. And of course, I went ahead and did that with the other one. Once they're set up, it's time to pop them into the cake. So I've made a couple of pilot holes firstly with some skewers so that I don't have to push so hard on these chocolate half spheres. Once I've made my pilot holes and I know where these bells are going, I just pop them right in. Then to finish off the stands that they're on, I just took some of that gold highlighter paint again and gave them a once over. Now to make the handle that goes between the two bells. So I took a bit of florist wire and I just bent it into the right shape using the two bells as a guide. I took some fondant and I rolled it out into a thin snake. I added a little bit of piping gel to that florist wire, and then I ran that snake of fondant over the florist wire, following the same shape. Once the florist wire was covered, I just took a fondant smoother and gently pressed it down. Cut off the ends and the handle was done. To attach the handle to the two bells, I just used a little bit of melted white chocolate and freeze sprayed them on. Once again, if you don't have freeze spray, you can use melted chocolate and just hold it there until it sets up a little bit, or you could even use some royal icing. It is pretty freestanding, so you want to make sure that whatever you use to adhere the handle is quite strong. Once that was on, I took my gold highlighter paint and I gave that a once over also. I then took two very small pieces of fondant that I had just rolled into tiny cylinder shapes and popped those on either end of that handle on top of the bells. And I painted them too. The last thing I have to add is the little hammer that goes between the bells and of course makes the alarm go off. This one was a no-brainer, just use a skewer and pop that in the center of the cake, right between the two bells. Then took a small piece of fondant, rolled into another small cylinder that I'd slightly flattened down, and attach that to the top of that skewer. And that's it guys, that's how you create this personalized, moving alarm clock cake. So guys, you may have noticed one little thing with this cake. It's pretty much stayed at the same time the entire video, right? Clearly I gummed up my mechanism a little bit when I was adding things and being careless, so be careful of that. But if you're happy for it to just move, then this will pass. Well guys, thank you so much for keeping me company again this week. I hope you really enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell so you're informed every time I upload a new video. So time is ticking. It's time for you to go and get your cake on. See you next time guys. Bye-bye.